Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, a webinar on BIM, the Building Information Modeling, that supports the digitalization of standards for the construction sector. We have today a lot of participants that are joining us online for this very interesting webinar. We also have a lot of speakers that are very happy and sitting on the top of their seat to start the presentation. So I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Els, and I am, it's a bit slow, sorry. I am a project manager engagement at the CEN TC Management Center, and I am moderating this webinar today in the background. So I would like to remind you that you're all muted because you are so many today, we cannot allow you to speak out loud. So I would like to ask you, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A panel of the webinar. The speakers will then go through your questions and take their time to reply the questions. We ask you not to use the chat box. The chat messages will not be looked at, so please use the Q&A only for the questions. When entering your question, please address your question to the speaker. That makes it for us easier to identify who you're addressing your question to, and also to provide you with a good answer, of course. You will see that there is a possibility to upvote on the questions, so you can identify questions that you think are interesting to have a response on, so that we also have an idea of the kind of questions that are of interest of the attendees today. Please keep your questions short and concise. Do not write your whole private life story, but just keep it short and address it very clearly to the speakers. So, should you be on Twitter, you're always free to tweet about a topic. I've seen some persons doing it in the past, so thank you very much, because I'm very much convinced that a lot of the attendees came through this webinar via social media as well. So we have a dedicated hashtag, trainings for standards, and our handle is the @standards4EU. Now let us quickly overview the agenda of today. So we all know that this is about BIM, of course. There will be a general introduction, and there will also be the chairman of CEN TC 442 introducing you BIM and the scope of the TC. Then we go through the different processes and methodologies, that are developed by CEN TC 442 that can be used. So without going in further details, you will just notice afterwards that the different technical body officers will take you through that. And we conclude with a liaison partner from another CEN TC that will guide you or explain you the importance of liaisons for different TCs. And then we conclude to wrap up the webinar, of course. So thanks a lot for the many attendees joining. Let me now give the floor to Constant Koller, who is my colleague, account manager, electrotechnology in the CEN TC Management Center, and Manuela Tangonge de Jean, who is convener of CEN TC 442, Working Group 7. Working Group 7 is having a horizontal role for the TC, but she will surely explain that in more detail later on. So please, Constant and Manuela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Els. And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Constant Koller from the CEN TC Management Center. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar of today about BIM, Building Information Modeling, to mainly present the role and the activities of the CEN TC 442 on the topic. There is more than 1,000 people that register for today's conference, so I'm very pleased to see that this topic has triggered a lot of interest within different communities. So thanks again for joining. Just to kickstart the presentation and the different discussion, I would like to underline the fact that this webinar, the aim of this webinar is to position the CEN TC 442 in the broadest BIM landscape, which, as you know, is not only related to the activities of CEN TC 442, but which touches upon a much more global standardization system and standardization activities in CEN, in ISO, in CENELEC, and also in the IEC. Just to go back to the origin of this webinar, it relates to a decision of the technical board of CEN and CENELEC, which actually invited CEN TC 442 to reach out to all relevant stakeholders to basically make BIM standardization a success. So we hope that with today's webinar, we will be able to provide you with input, answers, and clarification on the relevant topics for you to understand the role of the TC, the role of BIM standardization, and basically how you can also contribute, because this is something that is absolutely key for the success of BIM standardization. That's why through this webinar, we would like to reach out to the broadest audience. And this is why this webinar will be calling indeed for a structured collaborative approach. As I mentioned, this is something that is absolutely key because it's crucial for the CEN TC 442 indeed to take into account existing standards, existing and future standardization activity as much as possible to have the best structural way of working and also to avoid overlap as much as possible. I wanted to move to the next slide, but I think it's not working. So if someone can handle it for me. It would be ideal.
Try now, Constant.
Yes, I'm going to try again. Sorry for that. So just requested. No, it seems it doesn't work on my side. So we'll give up the remote control if someone can manage to move to the next slide. Indeed, yes, thanks very much. Indeed, because I would like to briefly mention the added value of the European standardization system in that context, because it's important to address the role of BIM, but to address the broader landscape, which is about the digitalization of European industry. And this is basically the role of European standardization, especially with CEN and CENEC, not forgetting HC, of course, but to support the digital transformation of industry through the state-of-the-art European standard, but also to achieve the digital transformation of the European standard as such, so that the requirement, the specification, and the guidance within the standard can integrate seamlessly any system. So indeed, this is why we can already move to the next slide. And this is why, as I mentioned, we need to look today and at future occasion at the full spectrum of BIM standardization in CEN, in ISO, but also in CENELEC and in IEC, because within those different communities, technical committees are also developing standards that are relevant for BIM and for the CEN TC 442 to address. So that's going to be one of the objectives of today's webinar, because within the European standardization system, we have the tool to ensure this successful collaboration between the different technical committees. It's the case within CEN TC 442. The TC has already several liaisons with different technical committees, but indeed we would like to go beyond and to reach this effective collaboration with all relevant partners. And this is why it starts with this webinar, to raise awareness about BIM, about the role of the TC, and to with the ultimate objective to trigger increased cooperation. And actually beyond BIM, as I mentioned, we need to look at the digital transformation of industry from a global perspective, because digitalization is blurring more and more the lines between the different sectors, and that's why we love to say that there's no digitalization without cooperation. So that's another argument for today's webinar. So enjoy the different presentation. Of course, you can provide questions in the chat, and of course, myself, my colleagues, the TC officers and experts will of course remain at your disposal to respond to any question, to any concern, to go towards this cooperation between all relevant parties. And that's why I will leave now the floor to my colleague Manuela to go further into the topic. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Constant. I thank CCMC to give us the opportunity to present our works. The purpose of the CEN TC 442 is to facilitate and support the digital transition in standardization works in the construction sector, of which BIM is a part. The CEN TC 442 has two main objectives. The first one is to provide a structured set of standards, specifications, and reports that specify methodologies. And the second one is to define, describe, exchange, monitor, and manage securely asset data, semantics, and processes. These standards cover the entire life cycle of building or construction. Sorry, I have some problem with my, sorry. The construction sector brings together a large variety of actors or interest, like products, services, and stakeholders. CEN TC ensure in that the information from each standardization committee is taken into account in all the specification, because the business expertise lies in each TCs. And CEN TC promote a trustly BIM ecosystem based on collaboration on the implementation of sustainable solution. As I have some problem. As the construction sector is an horizontal role sector, working together imply as a minimum a need for trust in order to clear up fears and doubts of appropriation of technical aspects by computer scientists, for example, and also a need for efficiency to avoid the duplication of data and the risk of development on contradictory solution. So, you know, sorry, I have some problem with my, it's not working well. So in order to meet this objective, CEN TC Fonds decided to create a forum for exchange between CEN TC Fonds and other TCs to establish a framework for a collaborative approach, to support the development and delivery necessary to facilitate the digitalization of digital information and processes in construction and building sectors. These tasks are assigned to CEN TC Fonds WG7 horizontal role. WG7 is an horizontal role in a win-win WG working group with three main activities: a coordination activity, an advisory activity, and last one, an outreaching activity. This webinar has two main objectives. The first one is to explain what CEN TC Fonds does in a simpler way, to provide answer on explanation on BIM, on how to use BIM, on BIM methodology and processes. And the second one is to invite TCs interested in BIM to liaise with CEN TC Fonds to develop processes, methodology according to their need in order to support the implementation of BIM. In a nutshell, building information modeling is a process of useful digital exchanges on model to liaise and operate the asset. Let us work together. Thank you, and sorry for the difficulties I had.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Øyvind Roth. I'm chair of the CEN TC 442. I'm from Norway, and my day work is by the Norwegian building authorities in Norway. I've been working with building information modeling for quite many years now. I would just, before we dive into the details here, I would take a short overview, a little bit high level, what we're doing and why we do this. So let's see if I'm successful with the technology here. Yes. First of all, why do we do this? As you all know now, that there is some kind of mega trend, so create imperative for change. That means that there is a lot going out there that we see that there will be a change, for example, the climate part, waste, whatever, and productivity, and so on. There have been a lot of reports, for example, here with the World Economic Forum, who recognize this. They have also recognized that there is technology now which can bring this change to life. And building information modeling is one of these technologies or methodologies that is recognized in this. And many call this the fourth industrial revolution, which is up front for us, or we maybe are already in the middle of it. So what is BIM? First of all, the core of the fourth industrial revolution is data. That means you can compute a lot of data in a very short time. And building information modeling, BIM, is about transforming data to information, which enable the digitalization of the construction industry in the whole value chains of assets life cycle. So it's about everything in the construction industry. And it's also important that when we have it in mind, maybe when you hear the presentation today and the discussion outside this webinar, is that they also use the acronym BIM for Building Information Model. The BIM or BIM model is a digital representation of the built asset. That can be a building or whatever. Can use the same wording for it's a digital twin or whatever, but the building information modeling and the scope of 442 is wider. And we also see this change coming up now from the EU Commission and the EU itself. It's about the new Green Deal strategy, where EU have recognized that they will not achieve the goals if they don't work with the construction industry. And they are also seeing that to have the construction industry on board in this change, the industry had to be digitalized. And as you see in one of the target goals in this renovation wave that was introduced, I think this just a few months ago in 2020, building information modeling is a part of it. So what do we do in Europe then? We see there is a high-level political goal to digitize the construction sector in Europe to gain productivity and carbon neutral society. And we also want to have and establish a common market in construction in Europe. And what we do in 442 then is to do the strategy we have is collaborate within the standardization bodies in Europe, CEN and CENELEC. We adopt the relevant international standards and collaborate within international standardization bodies on ISO, IEC, and Building Smart International. And we will standardize how to use international BIM standards in Europe and develop European BIM standards when needed to support European strategies, regulation, and market needs. And we see this is growing. I will not go into the scope in detail, but what's important here is that what we do in 442 is, as Manuela mentioned, to specify methodologies and so on, but it's up to other TC to adopt this when they want to support digitalization. So it's important that you understand that other TC still need to define the properties, process, and elements. We don't do that. We just provide the data structures. So just to also see about if we want to digitalize, we need to share data more effectively and that we had done before. So it's a lot of about interoperability. And this triangle has followed us for many years. It's say that to be able to share data, you need to have a stance for data, semantics, and processes. And that is reflected in the way we are structured in CEN 442. We have the Secretariat from Standards Norway. We have the Working Group 7, horizontal role, which are the host of this meeting. today, and we have a strategy and planning group which deal with the business plan and collaboration international with ISO and so on. And we have in project we have a terminology group. This is very much aligned with the ongoing work in terminology in ISO, because this is important that we define our properties and everything in the same way. We have a working group 2 which present later today that are the hardcore technical group which dealing with the data and data sharing and so forth, the model itself. And then we have working group 3 who work with the processes, and we have working group 4 that work with the semantics, and we have also a working group 6 dealing with dive into how to best support digitalization of infrastructure. So the important tool for us to work with ISO and so on is the Vienna Agreement, because we are not alone. The Vienna Agreement is the framework between ISO and CEN, how to collaborate, and we use that framework a lot in the work in 442, because as you see here, we are not alone. We are today focusing on CEN and CENELEC technical committees. We also have relations to the EU Commission and also other EU BIM initiative as EU BIM task group. But we also collaborate, strong collaboration international with ISO TC 59-13, which is the home of ISO BIM, and more or less is our twin in ISO. And then we have been asked to strengthen the collaboration with IEC, which we're working on, and we also have a stronger relationship with Building Smart International, which is the originator on the IFC standard, which is the core BIM model standard. So just this I have listed here all the standards. I don't go through them, but you can take a look at them. But we have adopted some standards. We have some process through Vienna Agreement with ISO lead, but we have also accepted that have some of the project is on CEN lead with the 442 in lead. That means that project are organized from 442 and ISO want to share that work and accepted CEN lead. That's and we also have now published 2 core products, homegrown products. We have more, but those are been in the Vienna Agreement. So this 23386 and 2387 is also homegrown project from 442. And we have a long work program ongoing, and this is growing all the time. So this is what I will say from now. So then I hand over to dive into more detail with Anne-Kemp. So thank you for now.
Yes, thank you very much, Øyvind. I would like to thank you, of course, for this interesting overview. There are a few questions that came in already, I suppose, for you or for Constant and Manuela. I would like to continue now with the presentation of Anne-Kemp, who is a convener ISO TC 59, Subcommittee 13, Working Group 13, working on the ISO 9650 series. There has been a question already in relation to that, so I'm happy to tell you now that we will go through that. Unfortunately, Anne-Kemp could not join us today, but we have pre-recorded her session. So she will introduce herself during this session as well. Please, let's open the floor for Anne. Should you have questions for her during this recording, please enter these questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
The ISO TC 59, SC 13, WG 13 working group who have been really managing the ISO 19650 series through, which Øyvind has already mentioned. I've been co-chair of the CEN TC 442 WG5 TG strategy and planning. My colleague Carl Davies is now taking over from me in that role. I'm technical director for BIM, geospatial and digital engineering at SNC Laval Atkins, and I'm chair of the UK BIM Alliance, which has been leading on the UK BIM framework along with British Standards Institution and the Centre of Digital Built Britain. So Oyvind has given some real detail about what TC442 have been doing and are focusing on. I think what I would like to emphasize is that we're dealing in information. So better information modeling and management may be an easier way for you to grasp what BIM is really about now. We're trying to look at transforming digital data into useful information, which will inform better decision making, making sure the right information is available at the right time for the right people in the right way. This isn't about overcomplicating things and using the best and the latest technology. The information needs to be appropriate so it can be used to actually help people making decisions on the ground, managing their built environments through whole life. So with the 19650 series, we've been really keen to ensure that we're looking at this from the perspective of all stakeholders who are using, managing, developing the built environment. So on this slide, we're looking at asset owners, asset users, looking at project delivery or asset management, so the operation and maintenance phase, but also looking at a society perspective, so supporting political decisions and planning, looking at building permits, but thinking about us as people, as part of society as well, and how we move and live within the built environment. So information management shouldn't be being done for its own sake. We need to be looking at the end in mind, keeping the end in mind. What are the outcomes we need? The 19650 series is applicable to assets of all sizes and all levels of complexity. So it can include portfolios of buildings, of campuses, of infrastructure networks, individual buildings and pieces of infrastructure. So the requirements in the document can be applied and should be applied in a way that is proportionate and appropriate to the scale and complexity of the asset. If it's feeling too difficult, that's probably a good sign that you need to step back and think, how can I take this in a more simple way? Make sure that it's actually achievable. So in this diagram, what we try to convey is that information management should be occurring within the context of asset and project management and within the context of overall organizational management. The organization may be a consultancy, it may be a railway company, it may be at a governmental level, but it also needs to work for SMEs as well. So we've taken a modular appointment-based approach. So this is contract neutral. We don't talk about contracts at all within the standards. It is very much at an appointment level. But you'll see hopefully within this diagram that we're really looking at, you have an appointing party and they have to think very carefully, what is the information specifically that I need from this appointed party, this delivery team? No more, no less, and needs to think about that for each appointment within a project. So there could be multiple appointments occurring, and they need to think about how they will bring all of that information together, ultimately within a project information model, but then importantly as an asset information model. So how are you going to use that information as it moves into actually being used and operated and maintained? And indeed, how it needs to fit within the context of the existing assets. So again, really emphasizing that this shouldn't be too difficult. A lot of common sense can be pulled into this. So think about the information that you need to make the decisions that you are anticipating, and state very clearly what you want. Having done that with your appointed party, then you can start planning how that information needs to be delivered. So plan how and when to deliver it. How as the appointing party you require that to be delivered, and allowing then the delivery teams to have a chance of actually then reciprocating and planning how and when to deliver it in the most efficient and effective way for you as the appointing party, but also for them as a delivery team. You then have the information delivery, so delivering it, and very much wanting to move to a more collaborative approach where there are substantive conversations occurring, which may need to be and will be in many circumstances supported by contractual arrangements. But again, ensuring that you're anticipating what problems could arise and working hard together to overcome those. And then the final, information approval. Have you actually received what you expected, what you need, and in the form that you will be able to use it, not just now, but in the future as well? And importantly, then you have the feedback loops. Has everything gone to plan? If not, you need to go back to those various previous stages. So, as I've touched on before, you have the organisational information requirements. So that could be at a government level. If you're planning for a new water route or an extension of an water route or a railway, what is it that you are needing to achieve at an organisational level? That might be the railway company, but it could be at a governmental level as well. So you'll be thinking about how you're going to be managing that asset, but it's not just about the construction and the design, it is the operation and maintenance. So can you actually build in proactive maintenance? How are you actually going to manage the flow of traffic and of people through that network going forward? And then that will help you to inform, well, at a project level, what is the information requirements that I'll require? And then for each appointment within that project, what are the exchange information requirements at that level? And this should help you to achieve comprehensive information that lands both within a project information model, but then in your asset information model as well. And this is set within the 19650 series to be done through whole life of a built asset in a securely minded way. The information exchange piece is where we start to understand that the 19650 series is providing a framework, a process for being able to define your information, to have it developed, to have it delivered, and to be managed. But you need another level of specification to be able to ensure that that data that you receive is right. So here you'll see the different aspects that we're now going through: level of information need, supporting evidence, key dates being presented through these different standards. But acceptance criteria is one which is being worked on within a new part for 19650, Part 4. But I think what's really important to emphasize, and my colleagues within TC442 will be going into more detail with you, is that the 19650 framework is really helpful for providing that context, but we need to go to another level of technical specification to really then ensure that we've got the right information in the right form. So in summary, therefore, in the top level, you've got the different parts of 19650. So part 1, concepts and principles. Part 2 is looking at information management during the delivery phase. Part 3 is then nailing how you do that over the whole life of the built environment and the built asset. Part 5 is looking at the security-minded approach. And then part 4 in orange there is what is being developed at the moment and is moving to a draft information standard over the next few months, the information exchange. And then, as I say, my colleagues in TC442 will be talking to you in more detail about how now we're being able to populate, discuss and determine how you're defining information requirements, common data environment, which is actually the process and the workflows, not just the technology, for being able to support this, the information exchange, the level of information need, and the data dictionaries. Thank you very much.
Okay, so far so good. We realized that some of the letters or the text on the slides might be a bit smaller because we were broadcasting this from a recording, but please be assured that we will share the presentation with you afterwards. Should you have questions for Anna Kemp or in relation to the 9650 series in particular, please do not hesitate to ask them via the Q&A, but mention maybe her name so that we know that we can send these questions to her. Thank you. So let me now take some moment to introduce you the next speakers. Thomas Liebig and Daniel Said are here for you to go through how to achieve digital collaboration in construction. So they are available and ready for you to go through their presentation. So please, Thomas and Daniel, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Els. I would like to start. Just introducing myself. I'm the convener of the working group 2, which is about exchange information, or as Erwin said, these are the more technical people dealing with data schemas and data interoperability. But of course, that's fundamental if we say that the new resource in future is data, or as I would say, open data, data that is accessible outside of the silos of individual systems. I just go through the slides. Yep. Here I would like to briefly show you, let's say, how we scope the work we are doing in working group 2. I think Anne talked a lot about processes. So this is the working group 3 that we'll present later, focusing at. And we, from a data interoperability point of view, of course, look at the structure of data and how to define schemas and also open interfaces to enable the use of data. And I think the in-between, the kind of overlap in between the two groups is what we call information requirements. This is the definition of what data has to be made available for certain processes in construction. And here I think we also draw our boundaries. I will briefly talk about the new EN 17412 that just had been released in December, which is about level of information needs. And by this, taking this term from ISO 9650 further into a more data focused way as we deal with. And then we deal in working group 2 with the ISO 16739, which is more commonly known as the IFC standard, which is about the open BIM standard for sharing BIM data. And later, and I think also Danielle will probably go more in that direction, we will show you an upcoming European norm 17549, which is about product sheets and product templates that looks into how product manufacturers can come in to provide the data that is required. Yes, if the one slide I briefly show you is the just finished work about the level of information need that helps project teams, but also clients to define what information is required in a construction project or renovation project. Well, this is something I think also important, and you can now have access to this. It has just been published. And here we can then define about the content of data, and then we take it further in things like IFC for BIM interoperability. We have an ongoing work item to talk about how common data environments should be developed to capture then later these kind of data containers or data sets. And of course, as you will hear more, it's about how product manufacturer can come in. So for product manufacturers, is how they are able to understand what information is required from them. This is a more template approach, and what information can be provided. This is the data sheet approach. And this work is now done for more static and for more configurable products, but Daniel will talk about it now. And this last slide should just show that we see, of course, data mobility as a worldwide problem and try to do as much as possible in joint collaboration with others like ISO for worldwide standards and Building Smart as the group that the industry group defining BIM standards. And at this point, I would like to hand over to Daniel.
Thank you, Thomas. Hi, everyone. Okay. I am Daniel Said from France. I work for Bouygues Construction, which is an international contractor. I'm going to present you an overview of the CEN standards that together define a complete set of IT tools for our industry, the construction industry. I will present how they are organized and complement each other. The following presenters can then go into more detail about each of them. Construction is our business. Construction is an old industry. It is based on many know-hows and expertises, which are the subject of regulations and standards. These business standards, written by construction professionals themselves, constitute the largest, most comprehensive, and most trusted source of knowledge available about construction. They are widely used by all professionals and are generally mandatory in our projects and on our sites. They are published by the national standardization bodies, the CEN, CENELEC, or ISO. In addition, in construction, professionals are organized according to business processes that correspond to the habits, the organization of the industry in the country, or the procurement method of the project. The first standard I want to introduce here is the EN ISO 29481-1. Its purpose is to define a way to describe business processes, not to standardize them, but to describe them. Let our computers understand us. Our second set of standards include EN ISO 23386, EN ISO 12006-3, and EN ISO 16739. Their purpose is to enable us to capture the business semantics defined by the business standards written by construction professionals. With them, we can create and manage data dictionaries that computers can rely on to understand the language of construction professionals. These data dictionaries are not places to create new definitions. They just make links to the definitions already existing in the construction standards. They can also store information templates that are used in the different processes that we are used to. Let's take an example. Imagine that we have a contractor who wants to check the acoustic performances of the doors he must buy to install them on one of his sites. His partner in this process may be the acoustician of the project. The doors concerned must comply with the product standards and the regulations applicable on the site. This will define the vocabulary our two professionals will use during their dialogue. For this specific process, they will only use a subset of all the properties that can be attached to doors. What if our computers could help us? This is not new, but our computers can help us in our business in several ways. First, by allowing us to build computer models for our projects, from which they can then calculate simulations, whether they are material resistance, acoustic behavior, energy behavior, or price simulations, to name a few. Second, by managing databases such as databases on construction products made by manufacturers and which we install on our sites. The main idea here is that these models and databases can be built from an information technology perspective using the vocabulary stored in the previous data dictionaries. This has two huge advantages. Number one, all the data handled by our computers are compatible with each other, and they can therefore work together. Number two, all the data handled by our computers correspond directly to our professional practices and to our professional vocabulary. If I take the example of the contractor and the acoustician regarding the acoustic performances of the doors, as the acoustician software complies with the standards and regulations specifically applicable to the project, it actually manipulates the data as described in those standards. Likewise, the catalog of door manufacturers describe their performance according to the same standards because they must comply with the applicable regulations. Therefore, data dictionaries, which only refer to objects and their properties defined by those standards, effectively provide the shared references necessary and sufficient to ensure compatibility at the computer level. Did you say email? Digital models and databases are not the only interesting features of computers. Today, these are essential in our professional modes of communication. For example, when we use emails. But strangely enough, emails can also be the cause of a break in the continuity of digital information. The EN ISO 29481-2 standard is the solution to this problem. To make it simple, we can say that it defines a type of attachment that contain the numeric that can contain the numeric data corresponding to the text of the message. In this way, our computers not only carry mails, but they also help us create and analyze their content. Let's come back to our contractor and our acoustician. Imagine that the contractor selects all the doors in the project schedule. It sends the list to the acoustician as an attachment that the acoustician's computer can analyze. The acoustician can then respond by completing the list with the requirements on the acoustic performances as calculated by his software. This complete list can then be reused by the contractor to place his order to his suppliers via the same type of message. A key point of this scenario is that by using the constraint mechanism defined by EN ISO 16739, the acoustician can express his requirements on the performances of the door without definitively freezing their values. Indeed, other actors, such as the manufacturer, for example, may also have constraints, such as manufacturing constraint to express. This makes concurrent engineering possible. In addition to making concurrent engineering possible, this solution has some interesting advantages. For instance, the exchange between the two actors is specific. They only exchange the necessary information. Also, the computers takes care of the tedious and error-prone part of information management. And last, the history of the information exchange can be kept by the message server. But the most important thing, in fact, during this scenario, is that we are digitally building the project. Computer-aided construction. The final part of this big picture is the common data environment. On this point, we now have the EN ISO 19650 standard, which focuses on the information management work framework. But the centerpiece of the common building information model is schema and external connection. This is a work in progress, but proposals will be submitted to public inquiry very soon. As a final remark on this overview, I would like to highlight 3 points. First, this is only possible if IT tools are able to integrate the business semantics as defined by the professional construction standards. Second, for IT, the biggest challenge when it comes to targeting the construction industry is providing tools that can help professionals build not the real projects, but their digital versions. When you have a digital model, it can help you a lot during the construction process or during the entire operation period. But before you have this digital model and you can get the best out of it, you have to build it itself digitally. And third, with this set of standards, construction professionals can hope to obtain IT tools that will meet their needs, fit into their practices, and also allow them to use concurrent engineering to digitally build the digital models that will then help them to do their job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel and Thomas, for this overview. I think it raised a few questions, but not too many. So if you have some time to go through them and formulate an answer on them, that would be great. I think we then can go and continue the next presentation. It is unfortunately again a recorded presentation. The speakers of this part could not be here today, but we recorded again their presentation. So should you have questions, please clearly identify or mention that in the Q&A panel when writing down your question, that these questions are for Peter and Manfred. Peter Kompelschek is the convener of Working Group 3 of CEN TC 442, and Manfred Huber is a member of Working Group of the TC, but they will introduce themselves in the presentation that will be opening very soon for you. So here we go.
Hello, my name is Peter Kompelschek. I am convener of WG3 in CEN TC 442. Besides being Austrian delegate to ISO, I'm convener of the Austrian BIM standards. And together with my colleague Manfred Huber, who is a member of the WG3, he's, as you can read, leader of the CEN TR 17439 guideline, and he's convener of the Swiss BIM standards, and he's working at the University of Applied Sciences in northwestern Switzerland. Next, please. What I'm focusing now is what the scope of our Working Group 3 is. It's everything about information delivery specification, and our work group has more than 100 representatives, experts from more than 29 countries in Europe. We have various projects running. One that you might have already seen is the technical report 17439 from 2020. It's a guidance on how to implement EN ISO 19650, both part 1 and 2 in Europe. And we have some other things that we are working on, and as they are not published, they are still WIs, work items. The first one to introduce is 40 Food 2023. It's a guideline for understanding and using EN ISO 294.11. This is information delivery manuals, the part 1 methodology and format in accordance with 19650. Then we have a work item which is 44/2024, a guideline for the implementation of BEP and ERR based on 19650. And then we have something that's very new for our group. That's a preliminary work item. So this is even more new than the other ones. It's a framework and implementation of CDE workflow and solution in accordance with EN ISO 19650. What's the scope of those documents? The first one, the technical report 17.429, of course, is trying to introduce 19650 in a European context, and we want to highlight the individual aspects of EN 19650 1 and 2, and we want to explain those standards by means of examples. The work item 4 for 2023, the guideline on 29481, is the scope is as 294.811 defines a framework and methods for linking process maps and exchange requirements with digital building models over the life cycle of a built asset. Our document in WG3 provides a guideline on how to develop an information delivery manual in compliance with the EN 29481. It explains the core components and development process of the IDM methodology in less technical terms. It's not non-technical, it's less technical. The objective is to help users and software vendors to understand and utilize the IDM standard in defining information requirements and deliverables. The next one is the work item 4 for 2024, which is a guideline for the implementation of BIM execution plans and exchange information requirements, again, based on 19650. This document operationalizes the tendering and appointment process of information deliveries as specified in the standard. The main goal of this document is to provide templates and guidance for all activities conditioning specification of requirements and deliveries in the production of exchange information requirements and BIM execution plans as described in the 19650, especially part 2. And this brings me to the last document that we are at the moment working on. That's the preliminary work item, which is the framework and implementation of CDE workflow and solution in accordance with EN ISO 19650. This work item is especially important as it gives basic information over what is defined in 19650. It will detail and structure the concept of a common data environment as a workflow for collaborative process of managing information and information containers. It will describe how to link a CD according to an EN ISO 19650 to an already existing asset management system of the asset owner. It will clarify how to maintain and manage living documents like information models. It will explain how to maintain, exchange, and manage information requirements like OIR, AIR, EIR, as well as BIM execution plans, and how to use and implement information delivery plans for the above entities, how to manage and collaborate between various information containers like models, requirements, container states, and how to process workflow by a CDE based on the IDM concept. This we will do in collaboration with WG2 of CEN TC 442, who is working on an API for CDEs. So this is more the descriptive, the content-driven document, while the other one is more technical for the implementation of such a CDE API. Yeah. And now I hand over to Manfred Huber, who will explain in short the principles of the document that we did on as a guideline for 19650. Please, Manfred.
Manfred, you are muted. We cannot hear you.
Thank you, Peter, for the overview of what is WG3 CEN TC 4 for BIM doing. In the second part of our presentation, we will have the focus on the guidance on EN ISO 19650 and ISO 19650 itself. I think it's important to know that ISO 19650 is a framework for information management using building information modeling, and therefore EN ISO 19650 provides us recommendation for a framework to manage information, including exchanging, recording, versioning, and organizing for all actors. And I think it's really important because it's a basis for a common understanding between all stakeholders regarding the information exchange during the whole life cycle of any built asset. The main function. On the one hand, we have the appointing party. The appointing party is the receiver of the information concerning works, goods, or services from a lead appointed party. And on the other hand, we have the appointed parties, and the appointed parties are led by the lead appointed party who provides information concerning works, goods, or services. And back to the appointing party, an appointing party has a need for specific information for a specific purpose at a defined point in time. And to that specific need or purpose, requirements are belonging. And on the other side, we have the appointed parties and the lead appointed parties, and they are delivering specific information at a specific time back to the appointing party, which is receiving this information. How could that work? As I explained before, we have the appointing party and the lead appointed party. And to the lead appointed party, they are belonging appointed parties, and together they are a task team. Important to know is that the appointing party and the lead appointed party with its appointed party, they are one project team. And the second important thing is that it's important to know that it's something to do, it has only to do with information management. It has nothing to do with a formal appointment between all these parties. And the view we have here with A as an appointing party and B as a lead appointed party and the appointed parties is a view at a specific phase of a project. That could be, for example, the project phase, but we have also a construction phase, an operational phase, and in that case, the lead appointed party can change. It's important to adapt that concept to the scale and complexity, and in that way you can use it for all kinds of projects, but you have to tailor it. We have a small example. It's a typical example. It's an example where EN ISO 19650 seems too much effort. It's an example with a small residential building, and the architect has a classic project management role, and the client there is not aware of EN ISO 19650. That's an example, especially for SMEs, and this kind of project is quite common in several countries across Europe, e.g. France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but also others. Here we have the client, and the client is not aware of EN ISO 19650 and is also not able to specify the information requirements. On the other hand, we need a so-called lead appointed party. And in that case, the client, as the appointing party, appoints the architect as the prospective lead appointed party to take over the information management function in its place, because the client is not able to formulate the requirements. And in this case, the appointing party shall establish a scope of services that includes supporting the client in specifying its exchange information requirements. Then the architect, as lead appointed party, defines a framework for the exchange of information according to the client's exchange information requirements. And the architect used this framework for the exchange of information within the design team, and that means including structural and MEP engineers and contractors. And the engineers and contractors are appointed parties, and together with the architect, they are one delivery team. I come to the conclusion, to the summary. W3 focuses information delivery. First documents are already published, and there is more to come in the near future. And our goal is to support a common understanding for collaborative working and information management over the whole life cycle of any built asset. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Peter Kompolczyk. I am convener.
Okay, thank you for that. We will not repeat them. That is a bit useless. So as I said, the questions for Peter and Manfred can be written down in the Q&A panel. Please mention that that question is for them so that we can inform them about your questions. I would maybe like to open the floor for Thomas Liebig again, because there was one specific question and I noticed that he wanted to reply that. Someone is asking or telling us that she's from a national association and that they're working with the national standardization body to define a set of information for BIM. The question is, how can they cooperate? Can you maybe highlight that, Thomas? Are you still with us? Okay, apparently not. Maybe that was a mistake from his side. Should there be speakers that want to come back to questions that are in the Q&A panel, please let me know so that we can handle them, of course. That is also possible, that we just speak out loud and reply the question that way. That is, of course, also possible, but then we need to, or you need to let us know, of course, so that we can open the floor for you. Should that not be the case, please note that speakers can also write down their answers to the questions. If that happens, they can decide to post it privately, or they open the response to everybody so that you can see the answer as well. If all that is okay for you, we continue with the next speakers. They are here today. Their name should appear on the next slide. If we can please have that slide open. Because they will tell us how to make BIM speak professional language as defined in the construction standards. So I would like to open the floor for Roland Dominici and Frédéric Grand, and they will, of course, introduce themselves and tell them what they are good at. So please, Roland and Frédéric, the floor is yours again.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Roland Dominici. I'm convener of WG4 in the CEN TC 442 and also on the French Mirror Committee. We are going to share with you today the work we have carried out in the last few years within the frameworks of WG4. Our purpose of our speech today is to present you how to make what you call BIM speak professional language and common language as defined in construction standard. And we will focus today with Frédéric on how can we describe products and the property digitally in our own standard through the EN ISO 25386. At first, some information about what is about WG4. So the mission of WG4 is to establish method standards for better and scalable data management to enable, of course, the construction stakeholder to exchange seamlessly and operate in a common language. This is a key word in the act of construction, from design to handover and throughout the asset life cycle. As part of a working group for program started in February 2016, we have identified as a priority an item for a priority for construction stakeholders. The priority was to enhance quality of data dictionary content, and we have started to work on this by asking the question how to achieve it. So it was clear that it was by developing the standard and a set of standards consistent with ISO 12006 series. So providing a methodology to define a common and unique definition of a property, so the name, definition, unit of measure. So taking into account introducing a consistency between existing dictionary through an interconnection network, because as you know, we have already existing dictionary like ABS-GD, CBM, COBE, and so on. And of course, to enhance fluidity and efficiency change between BIM software. But to manage this property, you need also to provide a process management for what we have called the property maintenances. Last year, we succeed in publishing the two first BIM method standard that I will present you in a nutshell. So the first one, on which Frédéric is going to come back in detail after, it's the EN ISO 25386. So it's a methodology to describe, offer, and maintain properties in interconnected dictionary. So here it's the principle of this standard, coming from the different source of information, where regulation, the different standard with different industry requirement, but also specific user requirement. We created a dictionary of property, quality approved here, and with the objective to provide to all the stakeholders a trust information to be shared and to be used in the process. The next one, the other one, is the EN ISO 25387. The purpose of this standard is to the data templates for construction objects used in the life cycle of any built asset. This standard provides the specification of a taxonomy model that define concepts from EN ISO 12006-3 for object collection, relationship between them, and to support the information need for the specific purpose of a data template. So here it's an example, an overview of what is the process. So based on the source of the same source of information, the property dictionary, we will create a data template for what we call a construction object, or here in this case, it's a plasterboard, and in the same, with the same objective to provide to all actors a common description of a construction object. Okay, now I give the floor to Frédéric, who will dive in detail on the 2336.
Thank you, Roland. Good afternoon, all. Just checking if it's working. It seems that nothing happens. Okay, sorry about the delay. So yeah, good afternoon again. Just want to tell you a story about 23386 standards and come into detail about it. What I should say is, well, it's like an old story. Let's say once upon a time, a group of people just decided, well, let's BIM all together. And after a while, they just came back to the conclusion, Houston, we have a problem. We have an issue to solve. Let's say I'm an engineer and I'm in a BIM process and I have to make some structural calculations. So in Europe, it's mandatory for me to use Eurocodes to make those calculations. So I need a way to find somewhere in my BIM model properties described as in Eurocodes. For example, the concrete compressive strengths. And when I want to use it, I need to have a manufacturer, let's say a precast concrete manufacturer, providing me information about this, following the same Eurocodes property. Then I'm an engineer and I want to make some acoustic calculations. And in this case, for example, I have to follow EN 12354-5 standard. And again, I will have specific properties to describe my BIM components to make those calculations. Then I'm a thermal engineer and I need to make some thermal simulation. And again, I will need specific properties coming from specific standards. Well, that's fine. But in real life, all those informations are coming from several sources of information. Even if we are here talking about European standards, that's different European standards. And each of these sources of information, it has its own structuration, its own way to define things, to describe things. And then properties are defined in different ways. That means that me as an engineer, I will not find this information structured the same way from a Eurocode document, from a EN blah, blah, blah document, because they are all modeled their own way. And that's an issue we have to solve. Trying to find a solution for this issue in this group, creating 23386, we decided to make some really strong statements. And the first one is maybe the most important one. We have to work with trusted definitions. We need to be able to have seamless calculations, seamless exchanges. We need to trust what we are dealing with. And one of the best way to do that is to be able to link those definitions to already existing standards. So I will have a dictionary and I will be able to say, these definitions in my dictionary, you can find them in these standards. Second really strong statement is that a definition that cannot be just a textual name plus a textual description. I mean, for a property, I need a lot more information to know exactly what I'm talking about. And here we are again talking about seamless understanding of the content of a dictionary. So what we need is a standardized way to define concepts. And for that, thinking about how to deal with these kind of things, we just said that one dictionary, we can handle it with just two kinds of concepts. They will be properties and groups of properties. Of course, all of these can be linked together. Groups of properties can be linked to other groups. Properties are links to groups of properties. But we just say to handle one dictionary, two kinds of concepts, properties and groups of properties, enough.
Okay, Frederic, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm afraid we lost you. I cannot hear you anymore, and I cannot Are you still there?
Yeah, it seems that my connection crashed, but
Okay,
I'm back.
it's back. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay, no, everything disappeared on my screen.
Okay, but you're back. Go ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me again? Okay, when did you lose me? When I was talking about the unique dictionary, I guess?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so what we just said is that as long as we understood that one dictionary will not rule the construction world, let's make it possible to interconnect all those dictionaries. If they follow all the same structure, all the same way to define properties and groups of properties, then it's not an issue to have several dictionaries because we will be able to understand all of those dictionaries. And that's the most important thing. So these are all the statements we made before creating these 23386 standards. And then here we are. We've got a standard with, well, we can say 3 different parts. The first one, again, we want to seamlessly exchange content. We want to have it trusted. So we decided to create a way to define properties and groups with a set of attributes. I will come back to that later. Second part is quality insurance. We have described all the workflows needed, all the processes needed to author and maintain a dictionary following this standard. And the third one is, again, the Lord of the Rings one, how to interconnect dictionaries. First part, how can we define one property, one groups of properties by using 23386? Easy. Let's take the example of a property. Well, the way will be almost the same for a group of property, but it will be easier than a property. So what do I need to define seamlessly a property? I need a name, but I need a name for the computers. That's back to Daniel Said's presentation. We really need to be able to identify what we are talking about, and it must be computer readable. So that's the computer name. We call it a unique identifier. That's the first thing that will be unique for describing this property. Then it will have human readable names, and it will be, of course, in several languages, as many as I need to describe my property. Okay, so I said definition or textual definition are not enough. That's true, but still we need them. So we will have those definitions in every language we need. That's the same. But to define a property, it will be nice to know about its dimension. And we are talking about physics there. Every property in the world can be described from the 7 base quantities, base dimensions. That's where we are here. We are able to describe clearly and seamlessly the dimension of the property. My property will have a data type. When I provide information following this dictionary, we'll have to know if I should provide a textual value, an integer value, a floating value, and so on. So really important data type. And maybe the most important attribute of a property, that's the link to a reference document. That means that if I want to describe, well, I've seen questions about an LSFB, for example, in the chat. If I want to describe an LSFB following this kind of dictionary, I will make a link to it, and I will not recreate the definitions. That's not the purpose to reinvent the wheel. That's the purpose to structure it. And that's really, really important to understand. And one thing really important also is a property will have a status. It will be active or inactive in a dictionary. And that's just a small set of the attributes of definition of a property. We have many others which are optional or not, but I won't go into detail. That's not the purpose. And I'm back to my first statement. Definition is not text definition and text name. That's not enough to be able to know what we are talking about. And we also, this is really important, when you are talking about trusting what we use, we have traceability of everything we do in a dictionary following 386. We have version number, revision numbers. We have the dates of who did what on which concept. So this one I've asked for the new property. Some experts have accepted it, etc., etc. And really important, in such a dictionary, nothing is never deleted. Only you can deprecate something, meaning that in 10 years, if you go back to a dictionary following these standards, you will know that this property is not useful anymore, but it's still in the dictionary and you will still be able to understand what it was about. So that's about the first part. And the second one, that's about quality insurance. As I told you, we want to trust the content we use. And to be able to trust it, as a user, I will have to follow specific steps. So I told you, I don't reinvent the wheel. So I will use reference documents, ask for a new property in a dictionary. This will go to experts. They will discuss together and decide if it's right or wrong to add it in the dictionary. As you know, as soon as we have two experts in the same room, then back to discussion. So we are just creating what we call a steering committee. We will decide about this different exchange and maybe disagreement between experts. And the idea again is to have trusted content quality at the end. When it's validated, you can be sure this property referencing this standard has been validated by the right expert from the right domain. And last but not least, as I told you, we are talking about network of interconnected dictionary, and the standard is saying that to interconnect those kind of dictionary, you must use 1206-3 standard, and especially the API it provides. And that's just a way for me to give the floor to the next presentation, which will be about this 1206-3 standard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frédéric, and also Roland for this overview. And that makes it, I think, a smooth transition to the next part. Should you have questions for Roland or Frédéric, please don't hesitate. The Q&A is still there for you. And I would also like maybe take 2 seconds to thank the speakers already, because I've seen that a lot of the questions were already replied via that option to reply them. So thanks. I would now like to give the floor to Peter Muig and Tim Lemoine. They will talk to you about how to describe products and their properties. So using that dictionary that was already mentioned. So please, Peter and Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Tim Lemoine. I'm a member of Working Group 2 and 4 of CEN TC 442. And I'm working at the Belgian Building Research Institute as an advisor. I'm going to explain shortly what's the purpose of a data dictionary. Why do we need something like that to describe our products and our properties? If we want to exchange information according to a specific information requirement between different parties, we need to make sure that we have clear agreements on common terms and definitions. And although BIM software, but also IFC already contains some semantics about elements and its relationship and its properties and property sets, these semantics are often very basic and generic. And in many cases, we need to go beyond that. We need to have the possibility to extend the semantics and define our own semantics and terminologies on top of that to make sure that the information we exchange is in a line to what European or national way of working is. For example, we have a lot of European and national regulations, so we need to make sure that the information we exchange is in accordance with that. And we need to do this unambiguously and only once, so that we do not have to start all over again with every new building project we start, and that we do not recreate or redefine every property, every element that we are going to use. And we can do this because many terms and definitions are already being described somewhere in documents, in international documents, European documents, or national documents. But all the time, those documents are PDFs or paper documents and are only human readable. By using data dictionaries, we want to make that information not only human readable, but also machine readable, that we can use that information within our softwares for analysis, calculations, and so on. But therefore, these terms must be well defined. As Frédéric mentioned, they need to be unique. They need to have a unique identifier. They need to have all the required metadata attached to that. Frédéric showed a nice diagram of almost all the metadata attached to a property. And for properties, we can fall back to the EN ISO 2386. But not only needs to be these terms not only need to be well defined, but also be structured. also combined or grouped certain information, objects, documents, properties in so-called data templates as they are defined or described in the EN ISO 2387. And we can create data templates on specific topics, for example, energy acoustics, or for example, construction products regulation and so on. But not only these terms need to be well defined and structured, but also accessible. We need to make sure that terms and definitions we use in our projects are accessible for everybody in the project. If I want to refer to this information in a project, everyone needs to have access to this information. So we need to have several locations where this information is stored. And we can have locations on a global level, for example, or European level, or sometimes maybe on a project level. And to store these terms, we need locations, technologies to do so. And we call those technologies or locations so-called data dictionaries, or for example, object type libraries or ontologies. It's just a name, but those locations are actually repositories, databases for storing these kind of metadata for our construction elements. And that is where standard EN ISO 12006 Part 3 comes in. It's a standard that describes a framework for object-oriented information. And this standard is currently in revision on the ISO level, because we noticed that during the development of the EN ISO 2386 and 87 that some things were missing. And therefore we asked for a revision so that we are able that the properties and the group of properties and the data templates we describe can be fit in the structure that 12006 Part 3 describes. But this standard just describes a framework. It does not say which technology should be used. One is free to choose. For example, you could choose a relational database or a graph database or something else. But we need to make sure that the way we access the information in those data dictionaries, that's be done in a uniform way by an API that is built in, so we can exchange information also between data dictionaries. And by using these kind of data dictionaries, we not only ensure that information data is human readable as it is now, but in the future also becomes machine readable. And if we take, for example, the door element, and we can describe a door element and all its components and subcomponents within a data dictionary. And in this case, we can fall back on already existing standards, European standards. And in this case, for example, the EN 12519, which describes the terminology about windows and pedestrian doors. So we can say that a door consists of a frame and has one or more leaves, and the leaf can have panels. And we can split them in, and we can define every single part of a door. And also we can define multiple names, definitions, and examples in different languages attached to those definitions and elements, so that the information can be localized, and we can also refer to sources where this information is described in. But not only can we describe elements and relationships, but also properties. So we can define the different properties of a door. The intention is that we define these properties only once and in a unique way, and that they can be accessed via a unique identifier. So for example, we can define a width, a height, and so on. We can say that it can be measured in length, and that we expect, for example, that the value of that property needs to be expressed in meters, but we can also choose any other unit as long as it's the same dimensionality. But then it also needs to be a very clear distinction between what properties means. Because, for example, if we define width, we need to make sure how that measurement is actually measured. Is it the width of the entire door opening or the width of the door panel and so on? So a distinction between what properties mean. But we can also, for example, define multiple properties that would have the same name, for example. We can define multiple properties, for example, as fire resistance, but we can refer to different sources that describe what the fire resistance is. For example, I've given a little example of the fire resistance according to the European standard, but also a fire resistance according to in my case, an older Belgian standard we use only in Belgium. And because we define those elements properties in a unique way, we can always correctly refer to them to all the times. So there is no confusion about what something means. So if we say we want a fire resistance according to the European standard, or we want a fire resistance according to the Belgian standard. So for example, when an architect sets certain requirements for a specific element, the contractor can simply search among manufacturers for the right product that matches the architect's requirements. All this is possible because everyone uses the same definitions and the same references, unique references to properties and elements defined in one or more data dictionaries. So by uniquely defining objects, properties, and relationships within data dictionaries at different levels, we will have international data dictionaries, European and national data dictionaries. The exchange of information between the various parties can be streamlined. And now Peter Muick will go more into detail on how it can be done and what remains to be done.
Okay, so then I will take over. Just need to capture the operation of the PowerPoint presentation. Just let me quickly introduce myself first. My name is Peter Muick. I'm from Austria. I'm a member at Austrian Standards. We are developing the BIM standards for Austria, and I've also been actively involved in the development of TC 442 in work groups 2, 3, and 4. My main efforts have been in work group 4, where the data dictionaries part is being developed. And I'm also a delegate to ISO TC 59 subcommittee 13 work group 6, which is developing ISO 1206 part 3, which Tim has already mentioned. We will get to that later. And apart from that, I'm basically a software developer, and my companies develop products supporting BIM technologies. Maybe I switch to the next slide first. Just forgot. Oh yeah, here, so too quick. So we have heard a lot about the issues involving information required from a number of different points of view so far, but I would like to focus on the more practical issues on that. And the questions are, I want to talk about is how to get the quality right, and how do end users benefit of this work. So this is in the next slide deals with this. Sorry, I'm a little bit too fast. Let me just quickly go back to the standards which are involved in this process. We've already heard a lot about ISO 23386, which is really kind of a basic standard that is needed for many things. It makes clear, as Frederick already mentioned, it's not just about the name and the description of a property. We have to look at the whole picture. And the important issue here also is that if there anything changes, and it may just be a comma in the list of values a property may use, this is a new property. And we have to deal with this process of managing the properties and the evolution of properties with versioning in a clever way. And this is the issues of, and there also come into play the issue of quality management. And this is what we talk about in the next slide. Just have to switch between the pictures. The quality management in a dictionary. Well, first, as I mentioned, is companies which are using these definitions stored on a dictionary. I mean, you have a company and you have a contract, and you have to provide the information to the products that you deliver or the services that you provide in a standardized way. So you have to make sure that at the time when you signed the contract or when the contract was signed, nothing has changed since that. So you have to make sure that when a new version of a property is being introduced, which of course can happen because you cannot stop the development, but you have to be sure that the specification you have had at the time when the contract was signed will never change. So this is the important process to make sure that you have something like a timestamp in a dictionary. And when you switch to a certain date, you can be absolutely sure that the data will not change, even though that the content of the dictionary changes. And the other important issue is how to make sure that the quality of the data you have in your dictionary is right. In Austria, we have something which we call the property server, which is run by the Austrian Standards Organization. And this is already in place since quite some time. I think the first version was introduced in 2014. So this is 6 years back from now. And it works very well technically, but I have to admit that the problem is not a technical issue. The problem is that the problem is the quality management. And that is something which is also discussed and dealt with in 23.386. So in 23.386, there is a process described. Let me go back to the last slide, how you can manage the quality process in the definition of properties. And the idea we have now introduced in the latest version of the property server, which, by the way, is an open source development, and everyone who would like to use it and look at it is very welcome to do so. Just contact me and I will give you the information where you can get the source code and the data which is stored there currently. So the idea how to get the quality management in working is to have some sort of classification for both the properties and the experts. So for example, you have properties for architecture, you have properties for structural engineering on all these different domains. And of course, you have experts which are dealing with these issues, are experts in that specific field. So you can automatically assign a certain property to a group of experts. And you can also, and of course, if there are descriptive information in the certain languages, you also can specify which expert can speak which language. So the idea is to make the whole process automatic and also objective, so that you can be sure that somebody cannot say this or that expert shall check my proposal, but this is assigned on a random basis by the system. And this way you can actually objectify and make the process reliable. So this is just an example how you can say you can have simple majority that a change is approved. You have the 2/3 majority and so on. So you can also define the rules for the process as such. And the question of changing the change in the dictionary, this is just a screenshot of the current version of the Austrian Standards Server. And then you have a setting where you can say, I want to see the current content of the dictionary or the property server, or I want to see the content of version 2019. So you have these certain timestamps, and the user can change or can define which version he would like to see. And this way you can make sure that definitions that have been made at a certain point in time will never change in the future and still allow the evolution of the content over time. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. The last thing I would like to talk about is what does this mean for the actual user? And I will show this as an example of a tool that we have developed for Autodesk. It's called the European BIM Standards tool. And the idea of this tool was to allow the users of the software to be able to take advantage of different information requirements coming from different sources. And what you see here, we have on the top row, we have 5 different sources of information requirements where you can download from the Austrian Standard Server, from the Building Smart Data Dictionary, from an Excel sheet, from a tool called BIMQ, which is developed by Thomas Liebig's company. And there is also development of a BIM portal in Germany. So we have 5 different sources and also 5 different formats, which of course is a problem because we might, in the end, we do not want to extend this and have 20 different sources in the future, but actually only one format or one definition that should be used in the future. And that is, well, I was too quick. Can I go back? Sorry for that. So this is the slide I wanted to show. And actually, there currently is an initiative from Building Smart to develop such an IDS, Information Delivery Specification Standard, using a simple XML schema. And I've been told by Oyvind, actually, that there is another initiative underway on the ISO level, which ISO 29481 Part 3. But as far as I've been able to figure out is that this standard is actually developed in Korea and not in Europe. But as the Vienna agreement tells us that we have to use this standard and not to develop another European standard. So this is a standard we will have to look at. But in the future, hopefully we will have an international standard that all the information requirements for the project will come from the same source. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, and also Tim, for this extensive presentation. Oops, should people have questions for Peter or Tim, please address them in the Q&A panel. I would also like to ask Peter and Tim to have a look at these questions, of course, and write their answers. We are a bit running out of time, so I'd like to ask the presenters to keep track of the timing and to stick to the planning that we had before. So yes, we can go to the next slide because I think it's time to introduce the next speakers. I don't know on your screen, but on mine, the curtains are really nice, but they're opening very scattered, very slowly like that. But okay, let me give the floor to the next speakers. Their names are Wolfgang Wilkes and Ralf Kierig, and I suggest that they introduce themselves because they are waiting online for their presentation. So please, Wolfgang and Ralf, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. We are talking now about the question, how can we integrate product data into BIM? This is, let's say, a kind of manufacturer's point of view. So we are looking from the manufacturer's point of view on these things which we have seen also before. And we are talking about a standard which is called EN ISO 16757, and that is called data structures for product catalogs. In particular, it's looking into products of building services, which is, for instance, HVAC or building automation. So in that sense, we start. No, I should go to the next. Okay. So we have, let's say, 2 parts. First is a little bit description of this methodology of this EN ISO 16757, which is embedded in many of the standards which we have heard about. Then we are talking on the content, which is the manufacturer's point of view and the let's say what they wish, how these property definitions can be done. In particular, also by technical standardizing organizations and how that can be related together to other standards. Okay. So if you look at a product catalog, then a product catalog has on the one hand side kind of exchange structure. So what we are doing is to exchange product information. So we need a medium by which we can transport this information. And on the other side, we need to describe or to understand, depends on which side you are sitting, what is the semantic of the data. So you need to know which kind of data you are receiving if you receive such a catalog. And according to that, our standard also has these two sides. On the one side, we are looking into data dictionaries because that is the way how we want to describe the semantics, the meaning of the data in such a catalog. And on the other side, we have to look into an exchange format which supports the requirements, in particular in the HVAC industry or in the building automation product industry. Okay, so and now we started to do this on the basis of a German standard, which is called VDI 3805. And this standard, and we try to bring this to a level of ISO and also CEN. And there we saw that there exists a lot of standards. So what we did, we worked together with these standardization committees. So here you see a lot of these committees and their standards, because we see us currently as kind of users of these standards, bringing things together to really have then a coherent set of standards by which we can afterwards define how these catalogs have to be built and can be exchanged. So for instance, we are using this data model for data dictionaries, which were just before described by Tim and Peter. And that's what we try to where we try to deliver the definitions in this area. Then we are using the EN ISO 23386, which was introduced by Frederick, where we see how we have to define the elements, the properties, and the elements for defining the properties, so that definitions can be really understood and are commonly used. And we use in particular for the mapping from such definitions to the models of the data dictionaries, also kind of templates according to what has been defined in the ISO 23387. So these are the dictionary standards which we are using and which we are using for our definition of semantics in such product catalogs. On the other side, we have to exchange this information, and that is on the one hand side in the BIM area very important to be aligned to that standards. And there, of course, we have the IFC standard, which is very, very heavily used there. And together with, on the CEN level, we have worked together with Daniel, worked on the 17549-2 standard, which is a standard which allows to use IFC, and particularly in our case, to use it for describing products and exchanging product information from manufacturers to users. And altogether, this allows us to provide this EN ISO 16757 with the goals to provide technical committees and these committees to formalize their product definitions by putting them into dictionaries, and to provide and to allow manufacturers on the other side to produce their product catalogs. And in particular in the HVAC industry, and in particular if this data should go into, for instance, simulation tools, you need to have some specific requirement to support some specific requirements. For instance, it is important to describe the behavior of these products. So in a way that in the simulation tool, this can be used to really put this product into a system and to then simulate the whole system with the information about how this product really behaves. Also, there are in many cases very many products with very many variants. So it is important to have structures by which these big multitude of variants can be delivered. And we are using, for instance, in that case, IFC constraints for describing how these specific variants, the many variants can be transported without really having really big catalogs which go beyond any limit. So these are some of the requirements which we can fulfill on the basis of the standards which we saw before. And in that sense, we have done well, part 1 and part 2 of the standards are already finished, and ISO standards and also CEN standards. And we are currently starting with the other parts, and new work items proposals are coming up in the near future there. Now I would go to the content side, which is of course very important for the industry. Just showing here that you have different standards where you are more or less describing similar things. For instance, there's the EN 442 about radiators and convectors. Then we have the VDI 3805 in Germany, which is currently the basis for our, let's say, experiments with using what we are doing here in ISO 16757. And there are other standards, for instance, about energy performance of buildings, both on European level, on German DIN level, and so on. And they all talk about similar things. So about radiators, for instance, or about the standard heat output for heating cases. They all have different definitions, or they don't have a definition at all, as you see on the right side. So it is very important in the dictionary to really define what you are talking about. And as Frederick told us, it's very important to have a reference to the standard which you are talking about. For instance, here we are in that case, there is a reference to DIN EN 442-2, which actually is this one. Nevertheless, obviously, there are some more information here than in the definition itself. If you look at it, for instance, here are some notes which have been put into the definition here as well. But the question is, and I was asked by another group, which is also doing this kind of thing, why do I need at all to put somehow in my dictionary, which I'm going to build, why do I need to define this standard here, which comes from this property here, which comes from another standard? Why doesn't these standards provide such properties in some dictionaries so that I can just refer to them? So maybe that is a thought we could think about. And now I would like to give over to Ralf. And he will, I think, a little bit elaborate more on that, what I just started to discuss here, how these different standards should work together. So I give over to Ralf.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, a short introduction of myself. I'm Ralf Gierig, working for a German association for manufacturers in the field of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And I would like to present our view how to create the future work in the whole context. And first of all, I would express the whole context, what we are thinking about. And we have heard about everything today. So first of all, it's a thing, smart standards will come up. So that's a point from the standardization bodies, CEN and ISO. They would like, and also the national standardization bodies as well, they would like to have at the end in the future, not only machine readable, also machine interpretable standards and data out of the standards. So we already have the BIM standards, which we have heard a lot of things have to be combined and coordinated there. And we have data dictionaries where we have information about properties and all the things belonging to the properties. So all these things have to come together, have to be coordinated, and at the end they have to work together so that everything that we have heard today can really function. And what we would like to do, and starting the discussion how this could be in practice, is to start with a very, very small example. What we have seen before from Wolfgang, it's the radiator standard. So we would like to focus on one really product. It's a radiator and all the belonging standards to this product, and how could we harmonize all the things that are necessary so that the whole world, which is shown here, can run. So that's our purpose, that we will start soon. First of all, we will discuss this inside our industry and also together with some software companies and also some users. And then when we have made our, so to say, proposal, what we think that what is necessary, we will start the discussion with all relevant institutions, standardization bodies, and everybody else. So that's the first I would like to introduce, and maybe the next slide, Wolfgang. So the first points that we already define, which are necessary, is to change the work of standardization. So we have heard a lot of this today, and here are some points that I would like to raise today. So first, I think it's necessary to define exactly input and output parameters inside a standard, a product standard or a system standard. Especially if you look at the input standard, where do the input parameters come from? So from which standard, and maybe if possible, use unique IDs so that it's clear which parameter do you mean. So for us, so that means for the industry, it would be good to have an obligatory data dictionary for the standardization work. So maybe we have already an EAC data dictionary, which is obligatory to be used on the international level, on the electronic side. So that would be a good idea to establish such a thing for ISO, CEN, and also on national level. That would help us a lot. Also, then we have to make sure that the standardization committees define the properties in the same way, and if possible, refer to the mentioned data dictionary and just look if the needed property is already defined and can be used, and then just use the unique ID of this property from the data dictionary. And then for that work, I think it's necessary for ISO and for CEN and CENELEC and EAC to provide templates for the technical committees. So not only just templates, also to inform the committees how to work with these surroundings, to create a common environment for the technical committees. And therefore, I think templates is the minimum basis for the work, and also the qualification, and information of the technical committees is needed. As I said, how should they work to create such common environment, and all the things can function together. So that's our point of view so far. And the most important thing, I think, is the information exchange. And not only we started, so to say, today with this webinar, but it's also necessary to inform all technical committees what is needed maybe in the future to reach the goal that I have shown before, to have a common world of standardization, so to say. And therefore, we need more information exchange among all relevant technical committees. I think that's the main point. And for this point, the next presenter will just show one way how this could be achieved. So I would like to say thank you and give the floor to Robert. Thank you very much.
I think I need to thank you, Ralph and Wolfgang, for this presentation. And indeed, I think this smoothly continues then with the next speaker, who will give us some ideas on how liaisons are realized between different TCs. So should you have questions for Wolfgang or Ralph, as usual, please put them in the Q&A. All the other speakers I see are currently very busy replying those questions. But then I would like to give the floor to Robert Heinze, who is a liaison officer of CEN TC 169. They're working on Lightning, and he is, of course, a liaison with the CEN TC 442 on BIM. So please, Robert, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me. Yeah, one sec, but yeah, my name is Robert Heinze. I'm hope you're still awake because it's 2 hours now we are in this workshop, and of course there are a lot of information in it. And I will, on top of this information, add some points on liaisons in general, because liaisons are quite important to have bridges between these TCs. Because we have at CEN and TENELEC, we have literally hundreds of active TCs. I guess it's around 350 active TCs we have at CEN, not on TENELEC, just on CEN. So it's really a lot of different groups and interests, and nobody knows everything about the standardization works. So it's quite important to have a connection between them to just to avoid duplication of work or to create contradict standards or something. Which happens from time to time in the past by mistakes. And also it's important to exchange professional information and knowledge, as you can see on this workshop here, that it's really important to have all these informations, to have and connections to all these informations, especially on something like BIM, which is not just down to one application or to one product. It's really across a lot of different disciplines. And also to give your expertise from your TC, from your home base into other TCs, that others can learn from your experience, from your standards, and so on. And also to build standards on standards is also in good practice, which we have in standardization, which makes standards also reliable and also traceable in a way. And the way to connect TCs are, of course, liaisons. Across CENELEC, CEN, but also to ISO, to external associations, IEC, and so on. So there's a lot of options to create liaisons. And liaisons in general on a CEN or on CENELEC level has to be requested formally. So you have to do an formal liaison request to another TC, which are you interested in, and this request needs to be accepted. So it's quite formal. So it's not something where you can just go in and say, okay, I want to liaise with you. You have really to rely to the formal stuff. So this is also needed, and it takes also a while to establish a liaison. So a couple of months down to the meetings. And after the acceptance, you report from one TC to another, and just in a one-directional way. So if you liaise, you can do it also in 2 ways. But then the other TC has also to nominate you for the other side. This is also something which was not aware to me in the beginning. So you are representing one TC to another, and not vice versa. It could be it's possible, but then you have to be nominated for this. And you do reportings, and you identify conflicts and opportunities between the TCs, and build a communication bridge between the TCs to exchange information, and also sanitization works. This is the job, and this is really needed, especially for BIM. And here you have a list, just roughly. I will not go from A to Z through this list, but at the moment, CEN TC 442 has 16 liaisons inside CEN, of course, for light and lighting, which I represent, but also for acoustics, for example, or for facility management, and so on and so on. So there are some liaisons. And CEN 442 has also a couple of liaisons outside the CEN and CENELEC world. So, for example, to the European Commission, or to Building Smart, of course, or to a lot of other associations, as you can see here in the list, and of course also to some ISO groups, and especially to the ISO group dealing with BIM. And one special about liaisons on 442 is this working group number 7, which is the host of this workshop today. Yeah, of course, BIM has such a tremendous fundamental role for the complete building, which is, as I said, across many disciplines. 442 creates a special working group just for this horizontal role, just to involve other TCs and to communicate the work of the 442 standards, which you have seen today, which is a lot and which is quite complicated. or complex. It's really deep IT level based and not so human readable in a way. So it's something which you need to process, to explain, to make some examples to it, as we have done today, to all the other TCs or to other externals. And Working Group 7 is some kind of an hub in both directions. So all other TCs, all other worlds, all the construction worlds can come into this 442 across the Working Group 7. This is a good example. It's also quite unique in the CEN world, as far as I know. But is a good practice to bound and gather all this needs. And in this Working Group 7, we found out that there are potentially 120 other potential TCs which has something to do with buildings or construction. So this is a high potential which can really grow the Liaisons of 442. And last slide. Oh, no, it doesn't. Yeah, now it works. Yeah, my last slide is an example of my own work or of my own liaison to Light and Lightning. So the 442 has created the standard 23386, which we have found today in a lot of presentations, which is a standard which describes properties of a property or attributes of a property. So some kind of meta properties. Quite fancy, quite interesting IT concepts to name and to attributize properties. So really interesting concept, but really needed and really unique and really important to describe stuff, to describe attributes of a property in a way that everybody can understand it, as we have seen in other presentations, especially of this from Frederick. And so Light and Lightning, the CEN TC 169, created in liaison with a Cenenic TC, the TC 205, together and CEN TC and CEN TS and technical specification, which is some kind of a light standard, the 17623, which creates which has as a content a list of all the lighting fixture and sensing devices properties, so all the luminaires, all the lighting properties in one structure according to this 23386. So this means, thanks to this BIM standard, we have a lighting standard which describes our in application and in electrical demand needed properties in a way that any other discipline, any other dictionary can understand what we mean with our properties, because we have our properties created according and standard for properties. So quite nice and quite usable, even without BIM. This would be a quite nice job to have a unique mapping core of our properties in our discipline. So this can also happen on other TCs. So maybe we see 120 other property standards based on this one BIM standard. This is a good example. And don't be afraid, BIM does not standardize anything of your special discipline. This is not possible in terms of neatness of this specialty. So it's just about really the fundamentals of digital construction, digital building, information exchange, data, and so on. It's nothing about in specialties. This is needed on your special TC, on your building TC, or on your external association. So thanks much. This was my presentation. I hope to get some time back. A couple of minutes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. I think we're indeed good on time to focus now on the conclusions. I hope that Oyvind is still here with us online so that we can open the floor again for him for the conclusions of this webinar. Again, please do not hesitate to add your questions in the Q&A. Someone asked us if we will provide with the answers later. Yes, we will do that. It will take some time. This is not feasible today, but we will provide you with a small Q&A report that clearly identifies all answers to the questions. So please, Oyvind, can you take back control of the presentation and tell us all about the conclusions of today.
Thank you, Els, and thank you to all the presenters and all the participants that have survived with us for so many hours and so much information. I guess it has been a lot of information to digest. So I should try to give you some takeaways that you should remember for today. First of all, you need to remember that the BIM is all about transforming data to information, so we can support digitalization of the construction industry. And it's all about the whole value chain and everything from infrastructure to products. We have in building products which we have focused on today. But to do so, we need to structure and manage data in so it can be useful information. And we need to do that in some kind of the same approach, at least, to do this. And 442's role in this is, maybe you can see it as a facilitator, that we digitize standardized methods and how data can be exchanged and information managed, as we have seen today. But we don't do any dictionary, for example. There is several dictionary. One, for example, the Building Smart Data Dictionary had been mentioned today. But there can be others, and there is others out there as well today. So still the TCs must define the properties as we has always done. But what we need to do together is to provide tools to tell you how to do this. And we would like to invite so many TCs as possible to join us as liaison, because it will be wrong if we sit down in TC 442 and do this alone, because we don't know the need of all the TCs. So I think we should do this together, as you have some example from some TCs doing this already. So please join. And if you be a liaison, you can be a part of the working groups, and you can be a part also in working group 7, which is the working group that will build up the information that is needed and the tools. So we need to digitize together to be successful. This is not something we can do on our own. So that's all for today. I hope we have answered more or less all the questions. If not, we will take the rest of them after the webinar. So that's all for now. I think there will be more webinars, so please give us feedback. So if there is special topics that we see recognize there is a need out there, we will try to set up other more specific webinars maybe. So, okay, thank you.
Yes, if I can add to that, maybe when people close down the webinar, there is a post-webinar survey where we ask people for their experience for this webinar, of course, but also for suggestions of future topics. So that might be the place to highlight your request or your needs for the future. I think we can wrap up the webinar here. A lot of questions have been replied, and as promised, we will share with you today the video recording of the complete webinar as well as the presentations. And on top of that, but that will take some more time, we will provide you with the Q&A report later on. So thank you very much to all speakers today, and thank you very much for all attendees, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.